This is the morning of a prisoner in solitary confinement. 6 a.m. My breakfast consists of a kid's meal, 2 half bowls of cereal, a juice or milk, and a package of sugar. You only have so much time to eat. Sometimes they mess with you. They pass the food out and they turn back around and pick up the trays. 7:30 a.m. My palms and feet get moist. I start to pace. I truly know how a dog feels when they're waiting for you to take them outside. If you are not standing at your door when the guards come, you will be denied your yard opportunity. 8 o'clock a.m. The guards radio to the booth to open my door. I have to back out of the door as the both guards positioned on my flanks grab an arm and escort me to the yard. The walls of the outside rec area are about 30 feet tall and the roof is open with bars going over the top of it. And that's the end of my out of cell movement for the day. These quotes are from the occupiers of the cells of the Pelican Bay SHU. My last speech talked about the policy of solitary confinement and how it should be used for all prisoners, even juveniles, or how it is used for all prisoners, even juveniles, and how it affects prisoners being released. In that speech, I said how beneficial it would be to change the confinement rule for all prisoners to only prisoners sentenced for life. However, some people might argue the fact that the new changed policy that I talked about in my last speech will not be fair to all prisoners. Questions might be asked about how the concerned effects of solitary confinement can only be concerned towards prisoners planning to be released from prison at some approaching point. Today, I'm going to discuss the arguments of the new solitary confinement rule and how it will be fair to all inmates, society, and federal prisons. The number one question that may be argued concerning the new policy and for the fairness of all inmates is, do prisoners who are sentenced for life not matter? Is humanity lacking with the new policy? Is it fair to treat the prisoners sentenced for life to solitary confinement, but not the prisoners potentially being released? I mentioned in my last speech the reason inmates get put into solitary confinement. Here's a refresh of some of the reasons. One of the reasons is for punishment of not following rules, concerns related to the safety of other staff or other inmates, and for the inmates' own protection if they were sex offenders or transgender, or they were put themselves into danger of getting beat up or harmed by cellmates. Inmates planning to get released would still face some type of punishment for the rules they didn't follow, but not being locked up in solitary confinement where help is found. Here are ways that prisoners who are going to be released could avoid solitary confinement. These are the other punishments that could be taken in place besides solitary confinement. Loss of privileges such as visiting and phone calls. They could be moved to a less desirable housing. They could lose their participation in a program or a group activity. And they could be put on extra duties. And they could even get their parole date delayed. And this is according to the Interfaith Action for Human Rights. This is fair because inmates who might be released could have a different approach to punishment that is safer for them to be released back into a functioning society. Speaking of society, another question that is argued is why prisoners need to be confined if they are just going to be in prison all their life. They aren't gaining anything from it. Well, this new policy will make it fair for society, meaning that no one will return to society who has been isolated. Here's a story about a 16-year-old who spent 3 years in New York, Rikers Prison, awaiting trial for robbery. 2 of those years were spent in solitary confinement. Browder's case was eventually dismissed, and after surviving 4 suicide attempts during incarceration, he was released, suffering from depression and paranoia from his years in isolation. Browder died by suicide in June of 2015, and this story is from psychologytoday.com. Solitary confinement should only be used if absolutely necessary, but only for prisoners sentenced for life. if they get as bad as trying to kill guards, escape, or kill other inmates. This should only be used because they won't step back into society. They won't ever live in society, so they can't cause harm to society with their harmful mental illnesses gained from being isolated in solitary confinement. Another question argued is, how can the federal prisons separate the really dangerous inmates from everyone else if they aren't in solitary confinement? Interesting enough, solitary confinement isn't actually prisoners who are dangerous. It isn't actually for prisoners who are dangerous. Contrary to popular belief, solitary confinement is not reserved only for the most dangerous prisoners. Often, it is imposed to isolate detainees during the pretrial stage of an investigation. And that is from the Penal Reform International. So with that fact, I believe that no prisoner waiting their potential release date should ever be locked up in confinement. A woman in the Tennessee prison for women in Nashville was in solitary confinement for 189 days, when in fact she had only been charged for a crime. She wasn't convicted for it, according to the Marshall Project. How can the inmates return to society when they have been isolated? There's extreme psychological effects on people who are subjected to solitary confinement, said Tom Castatelli, legal director of ACLU Tennessee. So you are pouring gasoline on a fire, so to speak, if your reaction to someone who's got mental health issues or disciplinary issues is to isolate them completely. That's from Tom Castatelli again. By applying the new policy, this would be fair to federal prison because the chaos of solitary confinement and the issues in prison would be gone because not as many need to ever be confined. For sure, inmates who are awaiting their trial wouldn't be confined. In conclusion, many will question the new policy change that I talked about in my first speech. But for the fairness of all prisoners, society, federal prisons, solitary confinement should only be for inmates and its fun. No one wants a morning to start off like the prisoners at Pelican Bay. Solitary confinement is hurting our society. Let's make a change. I think we can all agree that change is needed.